Welcome to the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. What's your train wreck? Everyone has one. The question is, are you just visiting or are you going to live there? I'm Mary Fran Bontempo. Join me and let's learn how to come through those train wrecks, not broken, but brilliant. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. I have a fascinating guest with me today. Nikki Mammano was raised in the greater New York metro area, spent her early 20s in Hawaii before returning to the Northeast, where she earned a BA in communications and settled in Montclair, New Jersey to raise her daughters. All that sounds very standard, doesn't it? Here we go. Her memoir, Breaking Good, explores her lived experience of addiction recovery and the criminal underworld of Oahu, offering an evocative, unsanitized look at the systems people fall through and what it takes to rebuild a life. Nikki, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk with you.
You and I, we touched base in booking all of this and getting this together, and I shared with you that my son struggled with addiction for many years and is coming up on 15 years sober. So I have a slight window into your world, but when I say slight, your experiences are beyond harrowing. And as a mother, I'm reading this and just like wanting to pull you out of all of that. And yet your experience was very different in terms of your family and all of that. So why don't you start where you want to start, where it feels comfortable, and let's just get into this story.
Yeah, so I always say that, and this is important that, and this is what I believe in. It's not for everyone, but I think mostly addiction is the disease of trauma and disconnection. And
Mm.
so, I not only had the trauma, but I had the way my family handled it. And so you're right. It was a very different situation, not different from everyone, but different in that when it came out, which was after years and years of abuse of all the ways of many people, it was handled poorly, and I was left alone to deal with my pain. And I say in the book, if we had come together, if they had held me and told me it was going to be okay and helped me work through it, I probably would have had a very different life and I wouldn't have done the things that I did, but that's not what happened. And so I ended up spiraling, into addiction, and then into drug dealing and homelessness and prostitution and all the things that come out of, that amount of pain. And it took me a long time to heal, and I'm still working on it. It's a lifetime thing, but to find my way back to myself and to be the person not only that I became post addiction, but the person that I was always meant to be, the person that I was born to be.
So when I first started reading the book, that your experience and your trauma doesn't really come into play in terms of being talked about until a little further into the book. Like we're dropped right into your Hawaii and your Oahu experiences and all of that. And I have to say, there was a part of me going, what caused this? With my son's own experience, I always feel like addiction is a form of self-medication in some way
Mhm.
or another. It's a form of trying to heal whatever happened. Um, so I'm reading your book and I'm like, oh my God, I kept saying, what happened to this girl? What happened to this girl? And it wasn't until a little further on. And I have to say, I think that was a very effective way to introduce people to this because they're kind of introduced to this horror show, which was your life with no clear explanation. And then finally everybody goes, oh my God, like this is where all this came from. And it provides an explanation, but it also provides another layer to your trauma. The addiction itself is trauma, but then we get
Yeah.
back to what caused the addiction. So
Yeah.
the thing that honestly struck me the most when I first started reading, you were very young and you were going to Oahu to go to school, right?
Hmm. Yes. Fresh start.
And very shortly after getting there, you just went off the rails and fell into some bad stuff, like picking up bad habits that just kind of spiraled. Correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the choice, the creative choice to start in Hawaii was a roll of the dice, and it does pay off, and it did work. However, the hope is, and the fingers crossed, is that people stay, right? Because you
Hmm.
get into that world and you see it, and at a point you're like, why is this person doing this? And at some points, people are like, do I even like her? And the truth is at that age, I was doing things that were not very likable, or that I shouldn't, have been doing, and I made so many mistakes. So I say to people like, hang on, get through part one because there's a payoff and there's an understanding, and then I go back there. So that's like really important, to say, and I think it did pay off. But yeah, I mean, that was a decision that was made after the original. It was originally written in chronological order.
Right.
So we did change it at some point. And I say we, as my agent and I had decided to kind of, revamp and move stuff around. But yeah, I went out there. I was ready to go to school. I had already had addiction. I was already running. I was in a lot of pain. I had been I wouldn't say an alcoholic. I had started drinking in middle school, and then I hit drugs pretty young. And by 16, coke, crack, and all this stuff. And I go to rehab. I shouldn't give too much away, but I go to rehab, and I'm going out there to, have a fresh start, and to go to school and to turn my life around. A friend had gone out there and said, come out to college here. And it was so fast because you're right. The drugs are, the addiction is to solve the pain. It is to feel better. We are trying to feel okay in this world, a world that does not feel okay. And so I always went back to that. So I had gone to rehab and I had tried to get clean, but I hadn't done the work. And it took me
Hmm.
years and years to do the work. But
Hmm.
without the work, I wasn't ready, and I was never going to be. And so I quickly became addicted there, and everything else spiraled. It was pretty
And I think
quick.
that's what people don't understand about addiction. They think if you go to rehab, they think, well, he or she went to rehab. Like, what's the problem? Why couldn't you just get it? But all of this stuff goes so much deeper that it's not, and there are so many triggers in life. And I think people who experience anything, when you get that like moment of panic, when you something reminds you of something that was traumatic in your life, and you go, but we don't go over the edge. And yet, because we've processed those things, but I feel like there's so much processing to do once you have fallen into addiction and have compounded your pain with the problem of addiction. Like there's a whole onion there that's got layers and layers and layers that has to be processed. And it is a hard thing to do. It is every part of your life is infiltrated by your underlying pain and then your addiction on top of it. So for you to
Yeah.
come back, like, how do you even start that?
How do I start the
How
process
do
of
you even
healing?
like, where do you even like, what part of at what part of the point, because you said you went to rehab and you weren't ready to do the work. Were you not ready because you weren't aware of really the root cause of your underlying pain? Or were you not ready because you just weren't ready to deal with that as part of your life? Because even if you know the underlying cause, to have to sit with that, that's hard.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know the underlying cause, and it took me a long time to get there. But, when I went out to Hawaii, I was 20 years old, and I was a brain that developed on trauma and addiction. And so that's a brain that doesn't develop. And so I made decisions that were poor, that hurt myself, that hurt other people, decisions that I wish I could change, and I can't, right? But I have to look back and remember that I was 20 and my brain was probably 13, 14, 15. When I really started getting heavy into things. And then also, the trauma started, my first memory that I put in the book is 3 years old. So,
Yeah.
there I am getting out of rehab and thinking, okay, I'm going to do this. And I had no idea. I hadn't touched anything. I didn't know I had to touch anything. And healing is healing and growing is the most painful thing I've ever done. And it's a
Mm.
continual process because every time I think that I've made it or arrived or come out of something, something comes again. There's layers and there's levels. And I've had so much pain and trauma that it's going to be a lifetime process. And I know that. Um, but at that time I had no idea. I wasn't ready. And I say in the book I was always a runner. And then at some point later at the end, as you've seen, I say, at some point you've got to stop running, turn around and stare those demons down. Um, and you can't do that until you see them, until you understand. And that takes maturity, that takes, help and all the things that I was, looking away from, that I was just so, I don't know if it was unwilling, but so unable to see.
Hmm.
And so, there was no way. And my therapist said to me, there was no other way your life was going to go because I've said, you know, I made bad decisions. I hurt people. I was an addict, like all those things. And to understand, and it was so life changing for me in that moment to understand, like from what I had been through, there was no other way my life was going to go. And that I'm not a bad person. I'm not a bad seed. I didn't set out to hurt someone, or anyone. It was a really interesting, way to look at it. But at that time, I was not ready. And so I did delve right into it, and not until years and years and years later. And that was post kids and being in suburbia and still holding it together with tape and holding it together with, like, little Elmer's glue, whatever I could, a glue stick. Finally I had to. It was, the universe does this, right? Like like it's just thrown in my face. And so it takes time. It takes time, but I highly recommend it.
I think that it's like all things that are hard. If you can kind of put it in your head that on the other side of this is some lasting healing and some lasting peace. And if you've had the kind of trauma that you've had and the kind of experiences that you've had, and your choice becomes, do I want to go back to that? Or if I'm going to go through hell, why don't I just do it? And then maybe I can get to something better on the other side. Was that a part of your, because you went up and down a bunch of times. The book is, there was one point at which I was like, oh, thank God, she finally got it. And then boom, crash and burn again. And at what point was that moment, that one moment where you thought, I haven't gotten to the bottom of this? Did you recognize that, or did you go to therapy first and your therapist helped you see, like, you haven't been dealing with your reality?
Yeah, I think, you know, you can't know what's on the other side till you get to the other side. So I didn't know that there was beauty on the other side. I
Mm,
didn't know that there was healing until I started to break things down and work on things and find out that it was. And then once that happened, I was all in, like both feet.
yeah, yeah.
And even then, that was years of uncovering and going up and down and back and forth, one step forward, 10 steps backwards. But it took a long time. I think, in when after I had kids and I'm in suburbia and I have that moment in the book and I don't want to give it away, the relapse, which happened, and then that moment where, I was done. And I had been done multiple times in my life, but this time I was done, and I looked around and I was like, no. I have a good life. I've been given things. With all the pain, I've been shown grace. I have, friends and love surrounding me. And I just wanted that last chance. I wanted to try one more time. And I did, and I started to see the beauty of doing the work. And then I continued to, and I say, and I just said, a few minutes ago, it will be a lifelong process, and that's okay. I'm okay with that today. And
Yeah.
I'm just doing the best I can.
Well, I think if more people accept that, one of the things about life that's so interesting is that it is an evolution. Every minute of every day is some sort of a tiny little evolution. And when we can't get on board with that, that's when we tend to stay stuck and mourn things that maybe are leaving us and anticipate things that we don't get. And, it puts us in this place of constant upheaval and anxiety and all those things because we can't recognize that there is a turning to this. That song, Turn, Turn, Turn. There's always a turning to this. But it's
Yeah.
not easy to get in that place. And I don't want to give anything away in the book either, but one of the things that really, really struck me at the very beginning of the book, when you started to fall into this and had gone downhill and were away at college and everything, nobody in your family came out to check on you. That
Yeah.
killed me. I mean, that killed me. And again, not to give anything away, but you were on your own at such a very young age.
Yeah, I was betrayed by everyone in my life, and since I was very little, I was fighting for my life by myself. And it's been a journey, and it's been rough. You know, I wish that things had been different, but I also wish they hadn't, because
Mhm.
everything that I've been through has gotten me to where I am, and it's given me the ability to write this book. And the whole reason to write this book was to reach other people and help people. And the feedback I've had from the people I help personally that have been through it The people that I help that are related to or know someone that's been through it, or the people that have said to me, I've never touched this with a 10-foot pole with anyone in my life, but now I have less judgment. Now I want to do more nonprofit work. Now I understand. It's like I could cry from the beauty that I feel in my heart from that. And so everything was exactly the way it was supposed to. That's just what I believe. And that goes with my biggest healing lesson so far, which is radical acceptance, which was an extremely hard one
That's
to
a
get.
fun one, isn't it? That's
Oh, it's
always
a fun one. And sometimes it slips through my hands, and I'm like, "Ah, I gotta go find it again." But it is beautiful and it helps me understand, it helps me be okay when things
yeah.
might not be okay, and again, not always easy, hard one to hold on to, but it's
So
true.
what does that mean to you, radical acceptance? How do you imbue your life with that, and how do you put that on in your life? What does that mean?
Yeah, it means that I accept things exactly how they are, and I know I can't control them. And even if they're painful, they are what I need. So sometimes when I'm in a dark night, and I'm wondering why this is happening, the acceptance of, the lesson of it, or the acceptance of this is where I am, and knowing that the beauty that comes after helps me to just let go. Because once I
Yeah.
let go, it's like, you hold on, you hold on, you hold on, that's the hardest part. And so the radical acceptance helps me let go in my head and in my heart. And then things flow more easy.
So this brings up another point, again, not to give a whole lot away here, but how do other people enter into that whole idea of radical acceptance? I mean, we have people in our lives come and go. I mean, I was driving home from Ocean City, New Jersey today, like a nut on the 95 and all that, and going like, oh my God. And even in those moments, like you just kind of have to step back and practice that. But is it's almost easier to practice radical acceptance of strangers in some ways because you know those experiences are fleeting. There's an end to that. There's a moment in time, somebody cuts you off in traffic and you're like, but then it's done and you don't have any residuals after that. But how do you practice radical acceptance when the people closest to you have done harm? What do you do for that?
Yeah, so when I'm talking about radical acceptance, I'm talking about what is going on to me, what is happening in my life and in my world, and how I can, view it, understand it, so that I
Right.
accept it. It doesn't mean that I don't have to still work really hard at setting boundaries and taking care of myself and self-care and interpersonal relationship, make sure that I'm protecting myself and being the best I can be. Um, and so that's something I'm always working on. And that's a tough one. How do we do that? How do we do that with people in our lives that are difficult? It's not easy. It is, and this is like one of my biggest lessons is boundaries and taking care of myself. Because as I said earlier, I was betrayed by everyone. I was hurt by everyone, and no one had my back. So I continue to figure out how to navigate those relationships, and that is a working process. But the radical acceptance is how it's affecting me, what's going on
Hmm.
in my life, how can I accept what's happening? But it doesn't mean I have to accept other people's behavior.
That's a valid point. And that's really important because, acceptance implies that you take it in. And it's not that you take it in any way of ownership. It's that you take it in and process it in a way that's healthy. And then, as you said, are still able to set up boundaries and say, no, this is not healthy for me. This is not working for me. And that's the part that I'm recognizing and accepting. And this is where we have to draw a line. But as your book goes into, it's really hard to draw lines when the people who've hurt you are the very ones that you want them to love you the most. So you tend to put up with more because you just keep hoping that that day is going to come when they're all going to wake up. Like, what did that feel like for you? And or did you get beyond it with your family?
Oh, my family and the things that happened, I talk about radical acceptance and I tell you how I'm learning to set boundaries. It is still not easy for me. I have I there's been a lot of pain, and there's been a lot of work in that area, and I'm still working really hard at it, and I still have to process it all the time. Um, so, and the whole thing about family and what you're expecting, I've let go of those expectations.
That's important.
And
That's a
yeah,
key thing to let go of
yeah.
expectations.
Yeah, and it's taken a long time, again, like years and years of therapy and friendships and trying, and also self going inward, and realizing that I cannot change or control the people around me, and nor do I want to change or control people that don't want to change, right?
That's a lot of
Um
work. Yeah, that's a lot of
yeah.
work to take on.
Yeah.
Certainly.
So, I'm just doing my best, surviving my life, surviving the cards that were dealt, and just trying to, carve out a little slice of peace and joy. And I do that as best I can. And so I set boundaries when I can, and I sometimes fall backwards on them, and I try to have relationships with the people in my life, and my family. That's where I am right now, like that's where I've
Yeah.
landed today.
Today, and that's that again, also a good way of looking at it because today and tomorrow could be very different things. And if you have enough stability, grace in your heart, whatever, you can accept what happens in the moment that's good. And then the next day, if something not so good happens, you know enough to step back and go, yep, I'm not part of this. I'm not letting this in right now. But one of the things that you said in your book was that all you ever really wanted was accountability from the people that around you. What does that mean? And how do you get it? And how do you move on if you don't get it?
You know, when you read the book, you'll see that, I was blamed, and I was
Yeah.
told I was wrong. I was told it was bad. All these people were abusing me and hurting me, and I sat with that pain, and no one took accountability. Even after, no one said, I'm here for you. What happened was horrible. Let me protect you. And so I've learned to not get that. And
Hmm.
it's a tough one, because it's so important, and it means so much, and it hurt so deeply. But I have to accept everything that happened to me in my life. I have to accept everything I did and made, the choices I made because of that. And I also have to accept everyone around me, and who they are. And that's a big lesson. And so, whether I get it or I don't, I have to be okay with myself. If you're asking me how, that's just work. That's daily work, different things, self-care, self-love, therapy, making a life for myself with my friends and my kids and you know, my community. And trying to give myself the love that was not there for me when I needed it most.
So is there a measure of releasing emotional attachment to things and people that, again, as you said, letting go of expectations is a big part of this, that emotional need and that emotional, desire. I mean, we are creatures of emotion that in human beings. And you were denied the very most basic of emotions that a child should have, those feelings of safety and protection and all of that. Is there a point where you try to just step back emotionally from those things and those people? And in talking about boundaries, do you find that emotional fulfillment other places? Because those are hard relationships to replace, some of them. So, like,
Yeah, and
how do you get that, or do you get that?
I don't think you really can replace that.
Yeah.
I think that I find other ways to fill me up, to fill my heart up, and to fill my life up. And there are parts of me that will always have sadness, for the things that didn't happen that should have happened, or the things that happened that, shouldn't have happened. Um, so, I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer for that. I just think that, again, back to radical acceptance, and to just kind of every day doing the best I can. And I still struggle. There are days I wake up and I'm depressed, and there are days I wake up and I'm super anxious. And I'm like, today's a self-care day. Today, I'm not going to answer people. Today, I'm going to, especially if it's people that are, doing things that are hurting me. So, it's like it's a day by day thing, and
Yeah.
I'm, just we got this precious life. I'm trying to I'm trying to do the best I can every day.
Carve out your space and carve out your own peace regardless of what's going on around you, which is not always an easy thing. You talk about generational trauma. Can you explain what that means to you? Is that, in relation to your family and you, that kind of generational passed down, or what does that
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, I mean it's trauma that's passed down through the generations, and unfortunately, and that's something that, I should say, like in the book you'll see that I was really hurt by my parents, but I try to also explain, what happened to them, especially my mother. And I don't, I always make sure that, and it doesn't mean that my boundaries need to change, and it doesn't mean that my self-care needs to change, but I do try to remember that she was traumatized, that the generations above were traumatized, that there were lessons and pain and things that were passed down, and you have to eventually stop and make a conscious decision not to pass those things down. And in order to do that, you have to recognize it. You have to be the cycle breaker. You have to be the person. And usually the person that recognizes it is, the black sheep. And, that they're not the black sheep. They're the person doing the hard work. But it's lessons and pain and trauma passed down, generation to generation until someone digs their heels in and says no more.
And I think, I keep hearing in my mind, I keep thinking about the emotional part of this, but you said somebody has to actually look at it factually, see what happened. So it's kind of a balance of trying to keep that logical, rational mind and allow it to see what it needs to see so the emotional part of you can heal. Because without those two things being on similar footing, one of them takes precedence and the other one gets out of balance. And if you're from what your story tells me, the emotional harm and the pain and the yearning and all that, it was too much for you to even look at what really happened and the why. You were just so overwhelmed by all of that. So I guess what my question, it all comes back to, you had said you were in rehab and you weren't ready to do the work. At what point do you get ready? Is there like because I always say this with my son, like people will say to me, well, what happened when I said, I have no idea what happened. The switch just flipped. I have no idea why. It's not like we were saying anything different to him. It's not like he hadn't been to rehab multiple times and heard probably pretty much the same thing. But for whatever reason, he was ready to look rationally at some things and then make the decision to detach from that emotionally. And so many people should do that. Like we have to find a way to separate and untangle those things. But was there a looking back, can you see any connections or any pattern that you followed to get there?
No, I knew when I finally was ready to dig in, I was a mom, I was in pain. I had been gaslit my whole life too, right? Like as much as people were hurting me and doing things, I couldn't see it, but not only could I not see it, I blamed myself. And so it
Hmm.
took a long time to get there and to see it. And it's different for different reasons. I was just at NYU talking to doctors, and we were talking about homeless addicts that come in, and I had said, see them, look right at them and see them and help them and meet them where they are, because that could be the moment, because someone cared, right? So it could be a moment where you meet someone and they care, and for the first time you're feeling care and you want to get clean.
Wanted to
For other
continue,
people,
yeah.
yeah, for other people it could be having children, for someone else it could be an aha moment, and who knows why. I say sometimes that it's like when you're at the eye doctor and it's blurry, 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 and then they flip it and it's clear and you see something that you've never seen before, right? And it's like, oh my God, there it is. How did I not see it?
Yeah.
So it's just for whatever reason that happens, and I'm speaking only for myself, but I'm thinking, that this is what it's like for other people. It's a sudden clarity, a sudden desire, a sudden spark, and a sudden strength that is just there. And it's like, no, I want this now. And then, it's the process of doing the work and finally feeling normal, quote unquote, right?
Whatever that
For the
is.
first time. Right, exactly. Feeling peace, feeling joy, like little by little, hanging on. So, and I say, like, just hang in there. If you're in the process, if you're early, please stay, hang in there, do the work. It is so worth it. And everyone will find out for themselves. And it takes some time, but it's there. The beauty is there.
I remember when David first came home from rehab, like when it finally clicked, when that whatever that switch was finally clicked. One of the first things that he did when he had gotten a job and got some money and all that, he was living back with us at home. Um, he went out and bought his own toiletries. Like he was so happy when he came home with Q-tips and shampoo and stuff like that. And it was that tiny little thing that really gave him the impetus to move forward. It was like, I can do this. I can take care of myself in a rational way with the job, with the money, and all. But it was, when you look back at it, it was steps. So it wasn't like this big transformational happening. It was all those little steps that you take, and eventually you're back buying your own toiletries, and then, you just
Yeah.
go up from there.
Well, that's the thing. And, people, as they're getting better, and especially people that want to give up, it's like healing is not a thunderclap. It is,
Yes.
it can be. It can be.
Yeah.
There are people that have had these moments where the universe has opened up and the light has come in. But it's all those tiny moments that build and build and build and that rewire our brain and show
Yes.
us that, like, we're worthy, living is okay, and all the things that come with it. So that's why I say, like, hang in there, like, and just little by little, you'll get there.
Little tiny baby steps, and eventually it morphs into a transformation. And it's an amazing thing to see, especially when you're on the outside looking in at somebody going through that. And you watch, like I watch him come home with a bag full of toiletries. Well, you would have thought he won the lottery. And I was like, this is great.
Yeah.
Because it was a normal thing. It wasn't one of the extremes that he had been living in. It was finding out that he could be normal, quote unquote normal, and finding out what that
Hmm.
means for every individual. But you lived your life on the extremes of normal for such a long time. There was no normal for you. And then, you finally get there by digging and clawing your way back. And suddenly we have a friend who says to us, thank God for my boring, pathetic life. And you're like, oh,
Hmm.
thank God, there's nothing going on today. Yay. And that's something that you end up celebrating because nobody recognizes like the big highs are great, but the big lows are not. So that little middle
Yeah.
ground, that's not a bad place to be.
Not a bad place to be at all. Yeah. I mean, even now when going to bed, I was with my friends the other day and we were laughing because it was like 8:30 and we are like, oh yeah, we're all going home, going to bed. And I made a joke, I can't remember exactly what it was, like, about just, 4 a.m. and being in the clubs. And now, I'm like ready to roll down, get the pillows fluffed at 8:30
Yeah,
p.m. But
exactly.
it's
And you look
fucking
forward
great.
to it. You're
Excuse
like,
my
oh,
language.
I'm going to
Yeah,
bed.
I know, but it's
Yay.
great. It's great. And addicts especially, and people that are homeless, have been unhoused and homeless, and lived the life that I did. Not only did we not experience normal, but no one saw us normal. We felt like we always were living on the outskirts of normal, and no one saw us, perceived us. And so even to be seen and to be, within the circle of the population,
Yeah.
it's a big deal and it feels good. And that's
Yeah.
another little piece.
Yeah. Maybe to be seen and also in some ways not seen as in not unusual. Like nobody's staring at you like, oh, crossing the street when you're seeing somebody lay on a park bench or whatever. They're just taking the money and giving you your bag and out you go. And it was a normal exchange. And that is something that I don't think we treasure often enough, that normal
Yeah.
experience. So one more little thing, and then I want to have everybody find out how they can learn more about you. How do you think all of this connects to resilience? I mean, I know you see it now, probably in hindsight, but was there anything like, was it like just a determination to keep going? Was it survival instinct? Because I think resilience is a hard thing to really name. We say that word all the time, but what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think resilience, there's always this question of nature versus nurture and what makes us, who we are. I don't know, and that's why I say that as much as crazy things I've been through, I've been given a lot of grace and a lot of luck. And one of it is that I've always, no matter how steep the hill was, at some point, I've always picked myself up, threw on the heavy backpack of pain and climbed. And kept
Hmm.
climbing and didn't look back. And the top of the mountain at times was so high, um, but eventually you get there. And it's just something that I've always done. And I'm very grateful for that. Um, and so I continue to do that. And I think, we just gotta, some of it's will, we've got to have the will to do it. But I don't know I don't know. Like I've thought about this a lot, so it's a good question, and I wish I had a better answer for you. I just know from my experience what it's felt like, which is like I cannot give up at the darkest hours when I've wanted to, and it's in the book. If you've read even the prologue, you start there in that moment. It's like you gotta fucking keep going. Excuse my language.
Mhm. But
Sorry.
I think you actually made a really, really valid point because we try to define this thing, this resilience, what this is. And I don't necessarily think it has one definition. I think, like you said, very simply, I'm not giving up. It's like that Andy Grammer song, I'm not giving up,
Yeah,
I'm not giving up. And I think I know for me, there's a stubbornness about it. It's like, no, no, this is not going to take me down. No.
yeah. Damn it, I'm
Um,
gonna make it.
yeah, exactly. But like whatever it is, it's that little burning flame inside of you that goes, I am going to keep going. I got to keep going. I either want to keep going, I have to keep going, but it's just that simple. It's that desire to continue. And maybe
Yeah.
that's it. That desire to continue.
Yeah, it's a desire and, also lending a hand. Like
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there's just one person, and I try to do that now in my life, and that's what everything's been dedicated to is when they say, we got out and went back in, got out of the fire, went back in with the water, the jugs of water or the buckets of water. It's like I just try to do that for other people because I know what it's like to be in there and I know what it's like to be surrounded by flames and to think you can't do it, not one more step. But you
Yeah.
can and we could do it together. And so,
Mm-hmm.
it's that's a big part of it. Like we got to go back in and pull the other people out because that person might have the resilience but need that, just that one hand to pick them up, and so it's a whole thing, but it's I think it comes from internal. I think there's also external. I think in that as a community, as a world, there needs to be love and kindness and we just got to keep spreading it and
Yeah.
help each other.
And recognize that you can be the instigator of the kindness and the love and the institutor of that, and that it eventually comes back to you. So it's about those little things, and being able to build on that. Well, this has just been
Yeah.
such a delightful conversation. Thank you so much for
It
joining me.
has. Thank
I
you for
want
having
everybody
me.
to know where they can get Breaking Good and where we can learn more about you.
So it's available everywhere, definitely online. You can get it anywhere, and it's available depending on where. Some like it's in my at my local bookstore. My website is nikkimammano.com, NIKKIMAMMANO.com. There are links to get it. You can also get a signed copy. Please follow me on Instagram, and there's ways to connect with me there. A lot of people reach out to me there, and that's just a beautiful thing. And yeah, the other thing is that I love speaking. So, you can hit me up. My email's on my page, my website, and happy to come and talk and share what I've been through, share what I know, and help.
Well, I cannot recommend this book enough. I literally I was just about to say addicted. Probably a poor choice of words, wasn't it? Yeah.
No,
But
no, that's okay.
I could not put it down. It
Yeah,
is it
thank
is an
you.
amazing, harrowing tale of ultimate redemption. So thank you so much for joining me and sharing this with brilliantly resilient audience today. And if you need a little more
Thank
brilliance and
you.
resilience in your life, head on over to brilliantlyresilient.net. You'll see that little pop up. You can sign up for our Brilliance Bit, of which Nikki will be a part when this episode airs. And we will see you all next time on the next episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Brilliantly Resilient podcast. Now, before you go, remember this: resilience isn't about bouncing back to who you were. It's about becoming who you're meant to be. If today's episode helped you reset, rise, or see your brilliance a little more clearly, I invite you to take the next step with me. Explore the Brilliantly Resilient resources, including the podcast, books, and the new Brilliantly Resilient mini course series, all designed to meet you exactly where you are. You can learn more and get started at brilliantlyresilient.net. Until next time, stay steady, stay curious, and keep moving forward, one resilient step at a time.